Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast Monday edition. Hope your Monday's going well. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil on the show, and today it's a Monday mailbag. So we opened up the mailbox. Erik's got 5 questions. A good amount have come in once again. I think the games are justifiably so. There's a lot of concern. There's also positivity. We're going to cover it all.
Yeah, we talked about it, Matt, kind of right after the press conference. I think there's a lot of questions in this fan base right now. They want to know what's going on. There were such high expectations, and I contend rightfully so. The way this offseason went and the way the roster looks. But there's still a lot of things that don't look quite right, and that's what this show is going to be about. Is kind of going through some of those, focal points, some of those areas that the fans are like, this just isn't working. What's going on? And so we'll touch on some position stuff, but I thought this first one from @Hodges Ryan is a good place to start because it's kind of a broader question that maybe lets us kind of talk about kind of how we see the whole thing looking. So his question, at this point, is your feeling more that this team just needs to buy some time, or do you feel this team is on more borrowed time given the issues so far? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Thank you, Ryan, for the question and for listening. I think it's a great question because I kind of don't have a direct answer at this point, or a clear answer between the two. I don't know, Matt, if you disagree, but I think they definitely need to buy some time to sort out their offensive line issues. I think, and there's a question later about this. The schedule works out. I like this schedule with the buy early. I did initially. I thought that was, you've got the entirety of Big Ten play basically without a stop until right before Washington. I didn't like that. I think it's great now that you've got this game against Oregon State, a bye week, games with UCLA and Michigan State afterwards, which again feel very winnable. Might be more difficult than anticipated previously, but there's definitely, it feels like an ability to still start 5-0 if you're able to sort out some of this stuff and hopefully hit the ground running by the time you get to Ohio State October 12th. But I'm also kind of worried about how this has looked week to week. And it does feel like at a certain extent you are maybe on borrowed time. Like if you're going to keep playing this way, you might lose one of these 5 games early. And if you lose one of these 5 games, I don't give you much of a shot, frankly, against Ohio State. And I think at this point, I'm certainly less confident in Oregon's ability to compete against the Buckeyes. We'll see. So I think it's a little bit of both. Like I do think you should expect to see some improvement over these next couple of games. I do think this has been a very frustrating start. I've been texting friends. It's like there's clearly NFL talent on this team. There are NFL. It's like there's an NFL player making an NFL play followed by there's a play that you see at like the JV ranks that doesn't look good. That's just silly. And that's the part where it's frustrating. And it feels like these things should be things that you can are correctable. But it's hard to know. So I don't know where when you read that question, kind of where did you go first?
My first one was, I think it's both. I think you are on borrowed time in the sense that you have games coming up that are going, each game gets just a little bit more difficult every week. But on paper, that these next 2-3 games are all games that are very winnable, are all games that you should, in theory, walk out with victories. And so you have time to kind of work through these issues. If they're still making these same mistakes and they're still making them as frequently as they've been making them come October 12th, when they play Ohio State, they're going to get boat raced. And if they're undefeated and up until that point, and game day could be here and big noon kickoff could be here, and the Josh Pate could be here with his rolling show. All the attention could be on Autzen. And then if you're still making these same mistakes and the frequency that you're making them, Ohio State will boat race you. And you will get embarrassed on national TV with everyone here to talk about it. And that will be the topic, is not how good Ohio State is, but how bad Oregon was, or how overrated Oregon was. But lucky for Oregon, they've got 2 or 3 games now where they can kind of work through these things. So it's both. You're on borrowed time because you're running out, But you have still enough time to figure out things and get yourself ready for that first huge game.
And that's spot on the Ohio State part of, what the talking points would be if Oregon doesn't take steps. There's still problems, and we're going to get into some of the individual things coming up here. But if Oregon gets crushed in that game, Ohio State, it'll be like they did what you expected from them. This is a top 10 team. This is a top 3 roster, top 2 roster in the country. This is a team that's supposed to play like this, but Oregon did not lift up its end of the bargain, if you will. So, you've got some time here, I think, to figure some things out. And again, it's frustrating because on rewatch, I watched the game. There are some really great individual efforts on Saturday. There's some people that played really, really well, and I hope we can talk about some of those. And then there's just some moments where you're just kind of baffled by it. And it just happened over and over again at the most inopportune moments. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if they put everything together and they play a much cleaner game against Oregon State, and you go into the bye week with, hey, they won convincingly, they won pretty comfortably, they covered. By the way, the line is not 14 points. I think it was closer to 20 when the season started. But they cover, and you go into the bye feeling like, okay, maybe they're taking some steps forward, and they come out of the bye and they play UCLA, they play Michigan State, teams that are picked in the back half of the Big Ten, and they win those games convincingly and or whatnot. And then you go into Ohio State. Like, that's a possible trajectory of how this can go. And this first 2 games could look like kind of a blip on the radar, or some of this stuff is not as, is systemic, and there are bigger problems, deeper rooted problems, and it never gets fixed. So, and that kind of jumps into the next question from @MichaelSayer87, who asks, what do you think the underlying offensive line issue is? I don't remember seeing a unit struggle this much picking up the blitz. Players who have been solid in previous years look to be struggling, and that really makes me nervous about next year's depth. #Autzen Audibles. Very much reasonable concerns, Michael. I have some really, I don't know exactly what to make of the first quarter and a half there with the blitz stuff. Like, Oregon gave up 4 sacks in this game, and then they corrected it. Part of the thing that was interesting in rewatch was those were almost exclusively 5 and 6 man protections.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew going in, Boise State, what did they like to do? Exotic blitzes come from everywhere. Why don't you have like more protection? I almost felt like some of this was like schematically ill conceived by the coaching staff. And I don't usually say that, and I could be totally off base. And if there's somebody in the comments who wants to correct me, I just found it weird watching 2 of them in particular where, and it was the 2 consecutives where in that like 4th drive, where it was like they brought the pressure from the exact same place. Oregon didn't really adjust.
Yep.
And on one of them, it was like you had the 5 offensive linemen, and Boise State brought 7 guys or 6 guys, and it's
like, what are you supposed to do?
You had no chance, right? And like, I don't even put that on the offensive line because there were free runners. I don't even really put that on Dylan in terms of what's he supposed to do, because there was just more guys coming than they could block. So some of that I was kind of like, was this? And again, the part that I find confounding that kind of adds on to that is we knew Oregon's receivers could win matchups,
one-on-one battles all the time.
So why do you need to run 4 or 5 routes? Was kind of my thought watching it. Like, because even on the Evan Stewart, the go route that goes for 60 plus yards,
we called that right when it started.
Right. And they didn't run 5 guys on routes. Like, they had guys in protection, and that's
they ran 3. They had the running back stayed in, and then they had Patrick Herbert. I mean, it was clear as that. I think I looked at you and was like, hey, Patrick Herbert's in. They got their blocking tight end deep shot right here. First play.
Exactly. And that was the thing in watching that was kind of interesting, Matt, was like, what it seemed like schematically they didn't have the, and like, so when they went to max protect or they had 6 or 7 guys in protection, things worked a lot better is what I'd say. And so I think this is kind of nuanced. I'll have to go back and rewatch some of the Idaho stuff, which frankly has been hard to get a hold of because of the stupid blackout with Comcast. But it seems to me like some of this was less like on, and I guess you could argue that Dylan needs to be making these calls and the offensive line needs to be making these calls, but it did seem like some of this was like you're kind of set up for failure with the way that the play was called and the way the offense was set up.
I think I don't think Dylan Gabriel yet is 100% comfortable knowing where to go when there's blitzes and whatnot. And some of that, I think, is we've done it. The fan base is certainly doing it. There's the comparison to Bo, and there's watching what Bo did at Oregon and comparing it to Dylan Gabriel. And I wrote this in the roundtable that we dropped over the weekend ahead of the game. And it's kind of similar to this question. The answer is that when Bo walked off the field against Liberty, he played in 27 games for Oregon, and basically the same system. And we already knew he was a very high cerebral type guy. And that's not to say that Dylan isn't, but like he was voted like the first rookie captain again, for Sean Payton ever this year at the NFL. Bo was. And look, Bo didn't look good yesterday against the Seahawks, but like Bo's traits were super high IQ, really smart. It's almost like another coach on the football field. And he had 27 games under his belt when he left Oregon. That's not where Dylan's at. He's played a lot of football, but he's not played a lot of football in this system. And he's playing. He's played 2 games. And in both those games, he now has the issue, the concern, the worry of an offensive line that's struggling to protect him, which for any quarterback will speed up the internal clock. And it's clear he's not comfortable yet within the system. He doesn't have he's not showing the command that Bo did, but that's because it's still new to him. And he's dealing with issues that Bo didn't have to deal with so often. And so let's see what things are like here in a couple weeks. Let's see when they settle in on an offensive line, what things are like. When he gets a little bit of confidence, do we see the communication, the pre-snap checks? Do we see those get cleaned up? I think that's the biggest issue, where they're not making the adjustments in time, or they're not seeing the adjustment to be made before the pre-snap. When we were talking about just now, like when they're 5 wide and they see Boise State going to, showing blitz, or they're expecting blitz in some capacity, and it's probably going to be 6, maybe 7 guys, like that's where you check out of it. And that's what they did against Trayshawn Holden. They saw something, they checked to it. Tez said that right when they checked to it, he looked at Trayshawn and told him, "You're going to score." And that's what happened. And so we're starting to see it, but I think it's a combination of everything. I think you're right that some of the coaching calls here have put the team in some difficult positions, but then I think there's the pre-snap checks haven't been as good, and we're also overlooking how important Alex Forsythe was in 2022 at center, and then how important Jackson Powers Johnson was last season. And it's clear, and this is totally fine, but it's clear, like Charlie Pickard and Poncho aren't those guys yet. They're not that level. Could one of them get there? Maybe, probably Poncho, but they're not at that level either. And that's going to be an issue.
That's the natural transition, and that's where I wanted to go next, because what is the underlying for the offensive line particularly? I went into the blitz stuff because that was what I kind of wanted. Some of the things that stood out to me watching the game again on Sunday was kind of just, it seemed like they weren't in position to really succeed, just because Boise State brought more than you could block at times. And it was kind of confounding. It was frustrating. I think you're right that there's probably checks that could be made. I also think like what ended up working ultimately in this game was where you just had more guys back and you ran fewer routes, but you were able to get the separation because these receivers are really dynamic. And I think that's something maybe to take from this game and hopefully learn from and carry into the Oregon State game and beyond. I don't think either center played very well is what I'd say. And I was a little disappointed rewatching. Charlie's errors are far more glaring because there are snaps that are just premature that caused problems. We talked about, obviously the obvious one was the fumble. And we talked on Saturday night, or I guess Sunday morning, about the one where it was just kind of like, how are you making the mistake where he's snapping the ball when the official's making an announcement? That's just kind of sort of makes you confused about the process of what's going on there. But, in rewatching it, I was hoping to see Poncho really pop and to really kind of take ownership and feel like, okay, this guy, there's a huge difference. Now, I will say Charlie gets pushed back a lot more than Pancho does, but I didn't necessarily see Pancho dominate or play or like elevate the position to a next level where I thought, okay, well, it's an easy decision for them. It might be an easy decision for them just in that when Charlie's out there, there's clearly some issues with some of the calls and some of the decisions, or the communication's not great. And they're going into a road environment. Could get worse. It could snowball where if you're dealing with snap, like you can't get the ball to the quarterback and you have to go under center a bunch. Yeah, then you're shifting your whole thing and the operation changes. But if you're picking between the two, I think Pancho to me is still the pick. But I just think I was a little bit underwhelmed with what I saw from him based upon what you maybe had hoped to see. And again, it's so early. Those were like he still hasn't even had probably 50 snaps at the position at the college level. So I don't want to write that off at all. I do think if you want to pick someone and go with him, it would be him. But it wasn't, just to be clear from my perspective, it wasn't like you watched it and went like, oh, Pancho's an A+, Charlie's an F. It was like maybe Pancho's a B-, Charlie's a C, kind of that was what I took away watching it. And maybe those letter grades are too harsh or whatnot. But that would be one thing I just say. I pause on the like Pancho's amazing at this, because I don't believe that really is in line with what I saw, at least rewatching it on Sunday. I don't know, Matt, does that seem fair?
Yeah, I think that there's a clear disconnect at the position overall. It's not, there isn't a guy that I agree with you. There isn't one guy that's just above and beyond better. Now, I do think from a unit perspective, Oregon is better with Pancho at center and someone else at guard than Pickard at center and Pancho at right guard and Marcus at left. It just felt like Oregon's possessions were stronger. They were more consistent. The production was better when Pancho was at center and the other players were in there at guard. And that's where it gets difficult, because maybe Charlie's the better center. I don't know from a pure individual talent perspective, but it just isn't clicking across the five. And Pancho playing right guard it's not working for him for whatever reason. It's not comfortable this season, or maybe the line checks aren't working, or the chemistry just isn't there. I don't know, but it felt like in week 2, especially in the second half, when Pancho was at center, the offense was playing better. And maybe it's because of the two guards, Strother and Harper, or maybe it could have been, I don't know, but that's how I felt. It's one in which they're not necessarily above and beyond better than the one or the other at center, but then maybe you look at it and go, okay, well, what's the whole entire unit doing from a success standpoint? And then we just base it off of that.
Yeah, and I do think some of the second half stuff was adjustments of it didn't seem like they were outnumbered up front quite as frequently. And just last thing on this, because I know offensive line is definitely a hot topic. I don't know if the listeners want to have us talk 20 minutes on this, but and I certainly don't want me to talk too much about this next part, but PFF again had Charlie as the better player between the two. And that wasn't strictly center to center because Pancho played right guard. Like Pancho was in the high majority of that game, whereas Pickard only played like 24 snaps. But those guys at least didn't think it was a situation where, oh, hey, Pancho is significantly better. In fact, they had Pickard. They didn't grade either well. I think Pickard was a 60 and Pancho was a 57. But that's what it says. You're on mute, Matt. Matt, you're on mute.
Weird. Don't realize doing that, but it's a conundrum where like they're in a tough spot. And this goes back to like the very first question, like, is time running out, or do they have time to work through it? I think, you've got this game, a bye week, and then you play UCLA. I think over these next 3 weeks, you need to have this figured out. You need to have this sorted out. And unfortunately, like, how does Marcus Harper deal with this? Does he come back and start right away? Like, is it reshuffle, reset the team chemistry, the connection concerns that they're having right now, or does it strengthen it? We don't know that. I would have preferred that they played Bedford at home so he doesn't have to deal with a road environment for his first game. But I think as soon as he gets medically cleared, you play him. You don't.
Oh yeah.
There's not a time where, hey, like let's just play him after the bye week or what have you. Let's give him like 2 weeks to prepare for the first game or what like if the doctors come out and say like, yeah, he can play and it's not really going to hurt his long-term health, like he's going to be sore, but it's nothing that's going to impact him from playing the next week. You play him against Oregon State, or you play him after the bye week against UCLA. You need to get this stuff figured out, and it needs to happen sooner than later because you still have time, but it's dwindling.
Yeah, and Bedford, we should note from Saturday, same situation as the previous Saturday. Listed as questionable, dressed, warmed up with the team, didn't play at all. So those are positive indications. And I know, Matt, we had heard like there's a chance he's going to play this week. Like, it was in kind of there was some discussion like if he might be able to go, and it didn't happen. Maybe it will this weekend against Oregon State. And I think if he does, I think if he is available, I'd like to see him play as many snaps as possible. That's feasible for where he's at from a conditioning perspective. And again, if you could convince me this guy's maybe not at full strength from a condition perspective, maybe he only plays 40 snaps or something like that. But I think if whatever he's available to offer, you need, because this line is struggling, and I don't know if it's going to be fixed immediately. I would be skeptical, but I think you'd like to see basically your best five available, and clearly Bedford's a part of whatever that looks like, I think.
All right, let's take a quick break. We come back, we'll wrap up the rest of this podcast. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. 3 questions in, 2 more to go.
This is actually the third question, Matt. We went break early.
Did we really?
Yeah, but here it is. We'll quick this one quick, because as we were just talking about a moment ago, when we were on our little break there, we kind of discussed part of it, but I think we can still make this work. From a question from @DWeather5. Despite having 2 close games back to back, it feels like we're not too far off from clicking. Do you believe our schedule actually lines up perfectly for us to get it all right before October 12th? #Autzen Audibles. Thank you, DWeather, for the question. We already talked about the schedule part. I think we kind of agree that like the schedule, I like the bye week. I think it's if you're going to have a team that's struggling out of the gate, good to have one early as opposed to late. Now, I don't love the fact that you then play 8 straight weeks without a stop, but this team certainly feels like it needs like a reset, and I hate to say that, and that's kind of concerning to say about a team after 2 weeks, but I think that part's good. And then I think the fact that your next 3 games are all very winnable games against opponents where you should have the more talented team so far, based upon results. These aren't teams that have been exactly lighting the world on fire. So I feel good about how the schedule does come together. But let's focus a little bit on everything clicking. Matt, I know we talked about O-line play. Let's kind of put that off to the side here. I think we agree that's maybe not that close. So maybe not everything's clicking. But I do think we're seeing some things get really close. You know what I mean? Like, I thought on rewatch, the defense played really well. And I thought the defense played better when different players were on the field than I expected. Yeah. Bryce Betcher and Devin Jackson were their 2 best linebackers, and it wasn't very close. And so I don't know. Jeff's like the team leader. Like, he was picked to go to Indianapolis for Media Day. The year before, he was picked to go to Pac-12 Media Day in Vegas. Like, he's a guy they care a lot about. I don't see them totally removing his role, and I don't want to overreact to a couple of games at all because I think he's still a really good player. He had a really tough game, and he's injured, right? He was on the injury report. He barely played in the opener. He has not looked quite like the player we expected, and I hope he can get back to where he needs to be from a health perspective. But you do have the luxury with Betcher and Jackson, the way they're playing, where maybe you give Boss a little lighter load here against Oregon State. You go into the bye week. My point, I guess, being like I think with certain personnel, the defense played really, really well. Like, there were series where it was 3 and out, partly because I think the right players were on the field in early downs to kind of slow down Boise State. So I think the defense is really close. It's interesting. They've only forced 1 turnover in 2 weeks. They were really close to having more this last game. Bassa actually had a couple that could have been intercepted. He just missed one in the first half on kind of a one where he drove and kind of outround or just kind of missed the route. He had one where he drifted back and probably his best play of the game and got a hand on it and almost picked it. Jordan Birch could have had a pick six very easily on that screen pass. The pass rush, I think, has been pretty darn good. So, like, I love the secondary. I can't say enough good things. Like, I think defensively, we are really close to everything clicking. Offensively, I think there's still a number of things to work on.
Yeah, defensively, they're really good. They've clicked. They look really, really good. There's a good push defensively up front. I think the linebackers, Betcher's game against Boise may have been his best game in his career.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was his and Devin Jackson's best game by a lot.
Yeah, they were everywhere. And then I look at, like, the secondary is really talented. 12 pass breakups is just ludicrous. Jabbar Muhammad had 3. Good call on that beginning of the week. The defense is there, and like things are clicking. Are there areas they could be better at? Sure. Like, you'd love to get more pressure to the quarterback. You know, maybe not having to blitz 7 guys to do it, and do it consistently, because they've shown they can get to them. Maybe it's creating more turnovers, like they didn't have any against Boise State. Like, you know, there's things that they can get better at, but defensively, they're really good. Offensively, like, what I think makes this so frustrating is we've seen the plays. We've seen spurts. We've seen the drive where, like, the third drive against Boise, like, first play, perfect pass protection, perfect pass, like 67 yards to Evan Stewart. 2 plays later, QB keep, Dylan Gabriel untouched off the left side of the offensive line for a touchdown. 3 plays,
boom. Yep.
75 yards. And it's like, obviously, we're not expecting that every single drive, every single play. But it looked like that's what we've seen the last couple of seasons for Oregon. And yes, they had to play well. They had to play, you know, to their standard. They had to do it to pull those things off, but it was possible. And it didn't feel like, oh man, this is going to take a Herculean effort to pull this off. Like, it wasn't strenuous. And the 2 drives before that, 3 and outs. And I think the drive after that, 3 and out. And it's just like it's like a person learning to drive a stick shift. Like, you gun it and you get it, and then you're just herk jerk, and you're trying to figure out how to do this, and you can't smooth it out. It's there. We know this team can play at the level like we expected, but it's just not there yet. And I think that's a positive in a way, in terms of they're winning these close games. They never should be this close, but they're finding ways to win. They're not breaking mentally. They're not breaking physically. They're making the plays that are required when they need to have them. But you'd like to see a game here before October 12th, especially, where things click and you go into the final half of the fourth quarter or the entire fourth quarter knowing, like, hey, it's Oregon's game, and now it's just get the game over with. And they played a clean game, and they played a game where you walk off the field feeling confident and excited in all areas of the field. Not happy that it was perfect, but you feel confidence, and we haven't seen that yet. But it's there. It can be chiseled out, and it can be shaped and molded and formed, but it's just taking more time than we expected it to.
Yeah, I like your stick shift metaphor. I was thinking of one myself last night of what this reminds me of, because it's just a very frustrating, just to see again the moments where things do work out the way you think, like you've envisioned it going into a season, and to see it be there and then be followed by turnovers that are sort of again, I think the Herbert one was really weird. I mean, it was, I think, just kind of a more on the Boise State player than on Herbert. Ball was tucked away fine, just helmet right to the ball, bounced out. The Gabriel thing was just a matter of, that was just a poor execution, right? Like that, there was some communication issue pre-snap. Dylan's hand was literally, don't snap the ball. Charlie snaps the ball. Dylan gets it. No one else is moving. That meant that everybody else was on the same page as Dylan besides Charlie. And then he tries to make something happen. And when you have a quarterback trying to keep it, right in the middle of the field there with linebackers and safeties around him, that's where you open yourself up to turnovers. And that's what happened. So, the offense is obviously, I think, a work in progress. And we touched on some of the specifics, and we're going to get to another one here in a moment. But I guess if you want to go glass half full, and Matt kind of touched on it, 2 weeks in a row, you've needed the offense, and again, you hate that this is the case, but you've needed the offense to go win the game for you late with a drive, and both times it's happened, right? Against Idaho, I know it was a little bit, but it was a 3-point game in that fourth quarter. They needed to go get a touchdown. When they did it, put the game away. This last game, tie game, took you 2 drives because they had an opportunity to go ahead and pull ahead again, but were forced to punt after there were those 2 incompleted, 2 misfires from Dylan in a row came at really inopportune times, but just missed on long shots to both Evan and Trayshawn, both of which probably could have been touchdowns if better passed balls were thrown. But at least they did it on the second, right? So like if you want to be glass half full, you can say this team has needed to go score consecutive weeks when the game mattered most, and they've been able to do that. So, but let's get to the fourth question here from @backroll23, who asks, after 2 games, Whittington is only averaging 2.7 yards per carry, while James is averaging 6.2. Clearly, he can't break contact like Jordan. Is it time to give Jay Harris a shot until the line gets stronger, as he is a bigger back?
He's not. Jay Harris isn't the third running back on the team.
Exactly right. That's Jaden Lamar. So I like the idea of a bigger back playing? Maybe, but clearly Jay's not in the rotation right now to actually play. He has been, we should note, like he was the Ashton Genty scout team guy this last week. He was not in his own number the days we watched practice. And if a guy is not, he's number 22, he was wearing 2. That tells me he has about a 2% chance of actually playing that weekend. Guys in scout team uniforms typically don't play very much on Saturdays. That's maybe the numbers, maybe it's more than 2%, but it's not a high number. When I saw him walk out this last weekend, that number, I went, okay, he's not in the rotation, because Jaden was in his number, and Jaden went out there and he actually got, I think, 1 or 2 offensive snaps in the late in that game. So I don't think Jay Harris is the answer. As Matt said, he's not their number 3 running back. He seems to be their number 4. What do you think about the rest of the question here, Matt? Because I have some thoughts, but I'll let you kind of answer it.
I don't think so. Noah needs to play. You're not taking Jaden Lamar and putting him in for Noah unless both guys need a break or score and distance indicate it's fine. I am a little surprised that Noah Whittington's running yards per carry average is so low. But how many times have we said in games the first 2 weeks to each other, like, wow, Jordan James literally made all of those 9 yards because of himself, because of the play that he did. It's the offensive rushing has been suspect. The lanes haven't been nearly as good as they've previously been. And you can have as talented of a running back as you want. You can have Herschel Walker back there. But if the offensive line doesn't provide you consistent running lanes and doesn't open up the avenues for you to run the football, it's going to be hard for anybody to get yardage. And we don't have this ability. It would take a really long time for us to just manually do it. But like, I wouldn't be surprised if you went and watched his rushing yards, like there was nothing available for him.
Yeah, no, I in having watched it, I'd just say Noah's rushes were not all that memorable. The most memorable one was he almost actually scored that first touchdown after Evan's long drive. He almost pushed the safety through the pylon there for a touchdown. There wasn't a whole lot else that was memorable. And to your point, I think that's the point the question asker is giving up here is like Jordan. So many of those runs were really impressive, like where he's bouncing off of Boise State defenders, or there's nothing in the A gap and he bounces it outside. In the second half, I thought they did a great job of adjusting by running more off tackle, and that was where they had a lot more success. And Jordan had a much better half of running in the second, in part because they were running off tackle as opposed to between the tackles. So more of that, and maybe more of Noah there, because we know Noah's explosive. Like if you have concerns about his recovery from the injury, go watch that kickoff return. That told me everything I needed to know about the explosiveness, about him trusting his knee to do what it needs to do. But I don't know if maybe, and again, I guess the point you're trying to make here, the question asker is maybe Jay Harris is better at running between the tackles and making more out of nothing than Noah Whittington is. I don't know that to be true. I know Jay is probably 20 pounds heavier and a couple inches taller, and maybe that does create advantageous situations or better situations than what we saw with Noah. But I also think it's kind of hard to measure some of that. And if you go off tackle more, maybe you avoid some of these issues. But I mean, I think the general problem here is like the interior of the offensive line has not done a very good job in setting up runs, and it's been everybody. I mean, the Marcus Harper is your experienced guy, and you're probably your best interior offensive lineman. And one of the drives in this game was derailed because he gets completely killed on first down, and Jordan James loses like 3 yards. So it's not just the new guys struggling there. It's most of these guys are having kind of some tough times, and it's really pretty impactful in the run game. I mean, Jordan getting over 100 yards, I think that was the best game he's had as a Duck, just because it was such hard running. Yeah. This question, because it lets us kind of talk more about some positives here. Next question: getting away from the abysmal O-line play and rushing attack from Oregon, kind of like he was listening to the show already and knew what we talked about. The secondary seems to be much improved from last year. Is this an early pick for most improved unit of the season? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think so. I think them in the defensive line would be where I would pick. I mean, you're probably not picking anything on offense. I mean,
no.
You could, if we're gonna other candidates, the return
special
teams.
teams return team.
Yeah, that's been great. Yeah, never mind. I was going to get into a negative. I was going to say the kickoff stuff's still been kind of problematic. A couple out of bounds, a couple guys off sides, but the return teams have been great. So I'd throw them in there. But let's talk about the secondary. I was so impressed rewatching this game. We already talked about 12 pass breakups. Jabbar had 3. Brandon Johnson had a couple. Nico Reed had a couple. Oregon's corners were really good in this game. Maddox Madsen, you watch the game. The success they had early was off of play action, where it let guys were just running open on crossing routes. And they had a couple of those in a row on, I think, their second or third scoring drive that really kind of got them going. I think it was their second. I think it was right after the long Evan pass and the Gabriel touchdown. But for the most part, I thought these guys were really good in coverage. And there were so few plays where there was much after the catch either. Like there were some awesome plays around the line of scrimmage. There were,
Betcher was tremendous in that area.
Oh, Betcher. No, Betcher was awesome. Again, I mean, Betcher had so many good plays in coverage where he's just on top of the guy and the ball's completed. Probably don't want to give up a completion, but if you're going to give up a completion, you'd rather have it be, immediately stopped like that. I love the secondary. I love what we've seen. I think honestly, it's strange. I think the weakest point might be Taishim, which is a guy who is the most experienced.
Was so good for them last year. It was, I mean, when he didn't start the first game of the season, and obviously there were other things at play eventually that when we learned, he played the entire second half. Like it made no sense to me. Or when we went to that practice before the first game and we saw Taishim with the second unit, it was like, this does. I just was confused. Like, Ty Sheen was so good last year, and this season he's probably been like the lowest graded guy that starts in the secondary, which just like the offensive line, who would have thunk it? Like
Yeah.
not me. And I don't know if most improved is the right word to describe the DBs because they were really good last year. I felt like when they were healthy, like Florence and Jackson were tremendous players. Obviously, Evan was good. It was kind of Ty Sheen was obviously good. It was always kind of that like, what are they gonna have with Steve Stevens or whoever is backing him up? Was the concern. But I felt like they were pretty solid last season. But I think they've elevated themselves probably in a tremendous way. Like the depth is better, and the front end talent is more evenly spaced out too. In terms of there's not as many like ups and downs between each position.
Yeah, I do think I think this is a more talented group. And the thing that's crazy is Cam Alexander was the guy we thought was going to start. Haven't seen him yet. Jaleel Florence started 10 games last year. He's not been available in either game. So those are two of the guys that I think we expected to be seeing a lot of playing time from. They haven't played at all, and yet people are asking questions like this, and I agree. I mean, I love Jabbar. Brandon Johnson probably has been my favorite of the transfer players. I don't know, Derek Hartman's really good too. But Brandon Johnson's all over the place, and he's like a plus player in coverage, making a bunch of nice plays there. He's great at the line of scrimmage, continues to be one of the few guys who, gets down and could really be there and run support consistently. I think he's awesome. Jabbar, you don't want to throw at that guy. You see the talent there. I mean, he's so good when the ball's in the air at making sure he's in position to make a play. So yeah, I think it's a great unit. I think it's one that you get excited about. It's one where, if you're depending upon certain matchups, it's one I think you can rely upon a lot. I mean, 2 consecutive games to start the season, the opposing passers completed far below 50% of their passes. And again, 12 pass breakups is really, really impressive. I know some of that came at the line of scrimmage with defensive linemen, but I think it's a good place to look when you talk about most improved, for sure.
Real quick, did we think Brandon Johnson was going to be this good? Because I'll be honest, like when he committed, it was like, this is a really good, solid, like, steal a basketball term, 6th man piece. Like, this is going to be a guy that's just going to be a really good role player and really excel. But I don't know if he's going to be this, like, superstar DB for Oregon. And honestly, like, the way he plays against the run, the way he is in coverage, like his position versatility, I kind of consider him maybe like Oregon's best DB and just in general.
Good case for it. There's definitely a case. I really was, so I would say when he committed, I thought he was more almost like a specialist in that, because remember he had such crazy tackle for loss and like sack numbers, and I was like, here's a guy who's clearly good at the line of scrimmage, and if you watch him, you see kind of some of that was coming off blitzes and how Duke used him, and some of that was just his own natural instincts. But the coverage stuff is the place where I've been like he and Derek Harmon. I feel similarly of like I expected them both to be really good on rundowns. They're both so much more impactful on pass downs than I expected. Harmon is just constantly in the backfield, constantly getting his hands up and impacting passing lanes. And Johnson is like, whether it's blitzing him or which we haven't really seen a whole lot of, or it's what we've seen him do, when he's man on or even kind of helping out of a zone or something. He's just a great player. So yeah, I think you have a strong case. He's your best defensive back. Jabbar's not going away. Nico Reed has had some really, really nice. I thought Nico Reed had a great game this last week, and
he's probably the most improved, like regular guy on the Oregon defense from last season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can make a case. If it's not most improved, he's the one who's at least been able to make the most plays. Like I just say he's been able to make more plays this year because I think he's playing a little bit more and playing. Maybe he should have been playing more outside in the past, right? Because he was basically their slot corner all of last year until there were some injuries and they bounced him out. No, it's a great situation to be in where, again, you're down two of your what we thought were going to be kind of your key rotational players, maybe starters. I think Jared had Cam as one of the starting corners, and Jaleel as a backup in his final prediction there on the depth chart. Those guys aren't playing, and yet you don't really feel like you're missing a beat, and you kind of wonder, like, what exactly are those guys' roles going to be when they get back? Like, I think they'll both have them. And maybe to mention Dante Manning, who's also played pretty darn well.
Played really good.
So, yeah, I think it's a great question. It's a good way to end because it lets us talk about something positive. Like, just kind of building off of it, not to go too far because this podcast has been a mess to record. I don't know. Hope folks have not noticed.
We apologize, or I apologize on my end. It's been
we've had dogs. We've had bad internet. We've had to pause the podcast a record number of times. But this is the last thing I'll say is the defense has so many good players that it's fun to watch. I think game to game of like game one was like the Mateo game. He didn't really do a whole lot on Saturday. I think he had kind of a down game and was pretty rough on some rush plays. And yet you're still able to play, I think, a pretty darn good game. Like Jeff Bossa, that was one of the worst games I've seen him play since like his sophomore years. Yeah. He was not at his best. And yet you saw Devin Jackson and Bryce Betcher step in and play really well. And again, the defensive backfield, they're missing some guys, and yet they're all playing still at a very, very high level. You've got 20 plus guys who are capable of being starters or major contributors on this defense. And that's the part I think you should be really excited about. If there's something you want to point to, is just the depth here. You talk about it all off season. I think it's really come together, and you've seen it through the first two games.
Yeah, it's been impressive to see. It's been fun to see. It's been exciting to see. And look, it's been much needed with how poor the offense has been, or how inconsistent the offense has been through the first 2 weeks of the season. But it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm going to go restart my day. It's been a rough start. Thank you for listening. Thank you for getting through all the tech issues on my end for this episode. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.